I was in the lowest, darkest, most despicable place that God forbid a Jewish soul should ever be in a church. But it was innocent. I was born there. I had no idea there was such a thing as a Jewish soul, and I had one. I had no idea of any of this stuff. But look what came by divine providence was this little kosher mezuzah with its eternal message that there's only one God. And I put it in that little drawer, and each night, and I lay down to go to sleep, it was right next to my head. But we know that the mezuzah watches us in our comings and our goings, not just when we're in our place of dwelling, but wherever we are. And from that moment that God sent me that little mezuzah, it watched me.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an extraordinary woman. If anyone has an extraordinary story, Tova Mordechai, it is you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tova Mordechai was an ordained minister for an evangelical church until she has become a practicing Torah observant Jew. And she's going to tell us a little about her journey, a little about her story. It's a fascinating journey. So fasten your seatbelts because this is one journey that is truly extraordinary. Tova, you don't look like an ordained minister practicing Christianity, although I'm not really sure what that is supposed to look like. Tell us how this change came about. How did you become from there to a practicing Torah Jew?
Well, that's quite a long story, obviously, but I think basically that I was raised in a very, very heavy-duty Christian environment, Christian home. My mom was Jewish, so technically I was born Jewish by birth. But my mom was born and raised in Alexandria in Egypt, and my father was not Jewish, and he was in the British Army fighting in the Second World War for the entire duration of the war. And for 2.5 of those years, he was in North Africa with General Monty and the 8th Brigade. So when they were on leave, where would they go? With either to Alexandria or to Cairo. So to cut a long story short, my Jewish grandmother, both of my Jewish grandparents, knew 10 languages fluently. Those who knew my grandmother said you would never guess that she was not born and raised in England her entire life. She spoke such a perfect and beautiful English. So actually there in Alexandria was a very big European community, and there was very prestigious school for boys run by the Salvation Army. It was a Christian Scottish school. And they hired my grandmother to teach English in the school. What my grandmother, I don't think, was really aware of was that the headmaster also hired his deputy headmistress to befriend the Jewish school teacher in an effort to convert her. Mm-hmm. So this took actually quite a lot of years. My grandmother was working in the school for well over 25 years. Slowly, this friendship developed, and eventually my grandmother converted, unfortunately, to Christianity. And then she influenced my mom to do the same. And my grandfather was quite religious, and he was devastated by this turn of events. And so he actually sat Shiva for my mom, as was more the custom in years gone by. And for his wife. So they lived separately after that time. But so then where did my grandmother...
And your mother lived with your grandmother?
Yes. And where did they go to church services was during the war, the headmaster of the school, he opened the schoolrooms for the Christian boys who were serving in the army, the Allied soldiers and Air Force people and everyone. So they had services and a time of spiritual strengthening during the war in the schoolrooms in the evenings. So that's actually where my parents met, because my father was raised Christian, and so they met in general troops church services in the evenings, and they became engaged. And my father promised my mom that when the war ended, he would send her a ticket to England where they could marry. And that took another 3.5 years till they were successful, the Allied soldiers, with the Battle of Al Alamein in North Africa, which was really a turning point in the war, when the Allied soldiers were actually able to overcome Rommel and the German army, thank God. And then they went through Israel, which was Palestine at the time, and then through Europe and liberating the camps, the concentration camps. My father was one of the Allied soldiers liberating the Bergen-Belsen camp. But
Wow.
he always said the American soldiers saw even worse than they saw, because they got there a few days ahead of the British soldiers. But I think that's what really made a heavy impact on my father. Was he was only 16 when he was enlisted in the war, and he served throughout the entire duration, and then another 2 years after in the military police, rounding up Nazis in Europe. And I think all of these years were very impressionable for him. And that's why my father decided that he wanted to do something. I think anyone that went through the war and survived the Second World War, whether through the camps or through the fighting with the soldiers, that they had to really bring meaning and purpose into their life. Why did they survive and so many others did not? And I think that had a heavy influence on my father, and that's when he went and trained and became a preacher and a Pentecostal preacher. Yeah.
Wow.
And
At what age was that when he became a minister?
um, well, let's see, probably was about 28.
Wow.
Closer
And
to 30, closer to 30. And my parents already had 4 children by that time.
Mhm.
I was actually the mistake in the family, so I came along quite a lot of years later. So by the time I was born, my father's congregation was well established in a small town in England, in Loughborough, Leicestershire, and there was no synagogue and no Jews. And it's very important to understand that the Christians go through the father. So the fact that my mother was a Jew held no weight in our home whatsoever. And so
What
I,
was there? Sorry,
sorry,
was there ever talk about Judaism in your home? Would your parents speak about
um,
it? Did you know that your
no,
mother was Jewish?
no, I didn't have. I was actually about 7 years old when I knew that my mother was a Jew, and we had a international convention in a big church connected with my dad's church in Nottingham, and we was missionaries coming from all over the world, so it was like roll call. So each group of missionaries, wherever they were coming from, stood up and everyone clapped and welcomed them. And then right at the end, the head preacher got my mom to stand up, and everyone clapped for Sister Sally, the Jew. And so I was about 6 or 7, I think, at the time. And when we got home, I remember asking my mom, "Mummy, what's a Jew? And why did Uncle Peter like this head preacher?" He knew my mom from Alexandria. He was in the British Air Force. So we always called him Uncle Peter. So I was very close to him. So I said, "Why did Uncle Peter ask you to stand up in church today? And everyone clapped for you." And she said that Uncle Peter made a big mistake, and I'm going to ask him never to do that again. And he never did do it again. But I kept pressing her, and I said, "Mummy, what's a Jew? But what is a Jew?" And she said, "Don't worry, love, it's nothing bad. Mummy is Christian, and I'm baptized, and I'm part of the church, and I'm Christian, and you're Christian. We're all Christian, and you don't have to worry about it."
Oh, wow.
And that
Wow.
was my whole initiation about Jews. But I had actually no idea at all. I had no, like, even the most
Did you
basic things that even the most assimilated of Jews knows. Like, I had no idea that the Jewish Sabbath started on Friday night and finished on Motzei Shabbos. I had no idea about Shabbat candles. I'd never heard about Shabbat candles. I didn't know about even Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shofar, nothing. Pesach, matzahs, absolutely nothing at all. In fact, my dad was blonde as anyone could be and blue eyes, and my mom was Sephardic. more of a Sephardic background, so she had a more Jewish ethnic skin tone with brown eyes and black hair. So then when she taught me about Jews, so I figured, okay, so that's what a Jew looks like, and I couldn't possibly be a Jew because I don't look like that.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow.
And of
So,
course, I went to very, very strict Christian schools. I mean, my dad was the preacher, so we went to church almost every night of the week and twice on Saturdays and three times on Sundays. There was always something happening. Prayer meetings, youth groups, it was like our entire life centered around church. And in school also we started every day with hymns and prayers in school
mm,
assembly, and I was known as the preacher's kid, so the headmaster would often ask me to make a contribution in the school assembly, which I was very happy to do.
mm,
I was well respected as a child, and I wasn't rebellious in any way. Like, not that I was a little saint, but I think that I was very, very heavily influenced by my father with the choices
mm.
that I made. Yeah.
So was it kind of a natural stage that you would then become an ordained minister yourself? Is that the
Um,
natural development?
yes, I think that more than natural development was that I don't know why, I really don't know why, but when I was a really little girl, I really wanted to be close to God. And
Mm,
every night I would say my regular formal night prayers. And always at the end, then I would say, please, God, I want to be really, really close to you. And when I get big,
mm,
I'm going to work hard and I'm going to earn a lot of money and I'm going to give it all to you. And please help
mm,
me that I can be really, really close to you. And
mm,
so my father's friend, this Uncle Peter in the big church in Nottingham. So when I was about 12, he began a Christian theological college to take in young people and teach them how to work and train them to become missionaries and go into the mission field. So he'd watched me growing up, and as I was the youngest by many years, so I grew up really more of as an only child. And so
mm,
in my school holidays, it was a long summer holidays, and so I would go to the college and just volunteer and help. And it was a very fun place for me. There was the print shop, there was the kitchens with like massive pots and all kinds of interesting things to do and to help with. So I it was more like a second home. So when I
mm,
was just 16, this Uncle Peter suggested to my father, why I really think that Tony is ready to begin her spiritual training, even though I should have been 18. But he said,
mm,
I think just because of my strict upbringing, because of my father and my entrenchment in the church, that um, he said, why don't you just send her and she'll begin her training?
mm,
I think when my father drove me over, um, the college was a very beautiful kind of English Victorian type mansion surrounded by very pretty English gardens, but a very high wall and a big gate. And when my father drove me over, I was sitting in the car, and I was only just 16. And
mm.
I think he
So
was
young.
having yeah, and I think my dad had a little bit of doubts. I mean, I was his little baby and I adored him, and I just followed him everywhere. It was like his little shadow. And
Mm,
um, so he looked at me and he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" He said, "You're so young and you can change your mind. You can come back home with mommy and me, and you don't have to be pressured to make this decision at this time in your life. You can do it later." And I remember I felt so grown up, and I just looked at my father and I said, "Daddy, I'm ready. I'm
wow.
ready." And he said,
Wow.
"Okay, I'll take you in." Yeah.
And how many years were you in there in this training school?
9.5 years actually.
Oh,
The
wow.
training wasn't that long. It was really about 4 years. Um, but it was really very cultish actually, and my father didn't realize it at the time. And um, but the
In what way?
principal,
Can you tell
yeah,
us, share with us some experiences?
okay. So the principal of the college believed that unless a person's spirit was broken, this is very
Mm.
Christian ideology, that um, that unless a person's spirit is broken, unless they're deadened to all natural desires, then they'll never be of use to God.
Mm.
Basically, Christianity, very, very simplified, believes that the world is taken over by the devil. And so, this physical world, with all of its temptations and desires, is opposite of our path to God. Therefore, we need to separate ourselves from the physical world completely. And
Mm.
so we were given a book of rules, and the first rule was that we had to be obedient to those in authority over us. And it didn't matter what they told us to do, no matter how humiliating or embarrassing, we had to
Mm.
instantly do it and without question. And this was to break down a sense of self respect and dignity, to humble us. We also
Mm.
had to eat anything that was put in front of us. That doesn't mean to say that the food was bad. We had a very good cook.
Mm.
But sometimes the food would be burned on purpose and we had to eat it. Or sometimes, like, one of the things that they would just choose random things for different people. Like, for me, I had to eat shredded wheat every morning. Like, my children have no idea what shredded wheat. I don't know if it's in America even, but in England it's a very big cereal. It's a popular cereal, shredded wheat. So no, there's nothing wrong with it, but when you have to eat it every day, almost every
Mm.
day for so long, it becomes complicated a little bit, like whatever. So
Sure.
yeah, and then other things, we had to fast a lot. So we had to fast one day every week for 24 hours, and we were
Mm.
encouraged to fast on 2 separate days. So for the 9.5 years that I was there, I always fasted a minimum of 2 days every week. And um, sometimes the principal would call upon the entire college to fast 3 consecutive days, and sometimes
Mm.
5 days, and once every year for an entire week. And the longest fast I ever did was 8 days. So you could say, that's ridiculous. How could I be sitting here and talking to you in the fast 8 days? But
So you
when
fasted. You couldn't eat at all, even in the
No,
evening
no,
after the
no
24 hours.
eating at all in
Oh,
the
wow.
evening.
Wow.
No, but you can't keep going for such a long amount of time
Sure.
without fluid. So it's extremely dangerous. So you have to keep hydrated. So
Mm.
during the long fast, we're allowed to drink what was called milk and water. We used to call it milk and water. It's rather like an English tea, but without
Mm.
the tea. So it's a tiny little bit of milk in the bottom of a teacup and a little spoon of sugar. And then you would fill it up with hot water. And you could drink the milk and water during the fast, but it's really difficult still. Like, you learn that you can't you can't just have one pillow. You have to, like, prop yourself up somehow when you're sleeping, because otherwise, when you go from lying down to standing up, if you do it too quickly, you just, like, get faint and you could pass out.
Mm. Mm.
And also, on the third day, you think it's really the hardest day. The third day of these long fasts is the hardest of all. And then is something, I guess, happens to your gastric juices or your stomach after 3 days. It's like it shut down a little bit, and it's like it knows it's not going to get food. So it's just a lot easier. You feel weak, but you can keep going. And we weren't allowed to lie in bed during these fasts. We had to work extremely hard. That was another thing. Sleep was also very much deprived. Sometimes you would have to work all day and all night and all the next day, and then they would only give you a few hours of sleep. So that's why I say it was a very cultish environment, because
Mm.
when you disrupt a person's sleeping and eating habits to such a degree, it's so much easier to infiltrate and
Mm.
indoctrinate and influence a person's mind and emotions. So
Sure, you can't
yeah,
think straight.
yeah. So you just become totally, and it's also like you're kind of like a captive, and they treat you
Yeah.
like that. And it's like, then you become like that you need them, and like they
Sure.
tell you things like that you'll never survive in the outside world, and you'll
Wow.
fall apart, and your life will just disintegrate, and you'll never
Mm.
amount to anything. And so these kind of like talk.
Do you ever have dream nightmares now about that time period of what you went through? Sounds
No,
horrific.
I mean, it's already over 40 years, so
Right, right,
it's been a long journey, and you
right.
can't just press buttons and change stations. It definitely was a very long transition, and it's like there was very a lot of control. And I
Mm,
remember we were given domestic duties, and like just a very quick example, like the mother superior, she like called me one day. My job was in the morning 1 hour to clean all the toilets and bathrooms in the entire complex, including the public bathrooms of the church
mhm,
outside. And so she called me back and she said, I don't believe that you were the one that cleaned this. And do you see the dirt? And she was pointing into the sink, but honestly, Hannah, I never saw a speck of dirt. So I was a big sin to lie. So I wasn't going to say, I see the dirt because I couldn't see it. So she was pointing and I kept cleaning over and I kept saying, I'm very sorry, mother. I'm very sorry, mother. But she was like so outraged. She kept saying, do you see the dirt? And I just
mm.
saying, in the end, cut long story short, she ended smacking my head on the wall, like just
My
hitting my head against a wall and saying, cry, girl, because if you didn't cry, it wasn't like as if they broke you, but I was not very
mm.
good at crying. So, and I was like, so I
Oh
never
my
cried.
gosh.
So, but I was
Wow.
married for many, many years, and I would clean my sink in my bathroom and tell myself like it's okay, she's not there.
It's
And you
wow.
might come to my house and the sink might be on purpose a little bit dirty, and it's not really that dirty, but yeah. And
Wow.
it took me maybe about at least 8 years to be eating something and not liking it. And then all of a sudden, one day I realized, hey, you know what? I can spit this out. I don't
Right, you
have to
don't need
eat
to eat
this.
that. Oh my gosh.
But
Wow.
these things took a
Wow.
very, very long time. Like
I'm
the
sure.
transition was, yeah,
I mean, it sounds like a harrowing experience and such overly strict rules. So,
yeah.
like, how did you come out of there? Like, how did you realize at one point that this
Um,
is not what you want for your life?
well,
Especially when they seem to have so much control over your mind and so much control over your body, control over every aspect of your life. When
yeah.
did you realize that this was something that you want more for you?
Well, that's a really good question, and but you have to understand. I know it sounds strange, but I actually liked it in the church because
Mm,
I was very, very focused on my goal. And I
mm,
thought that this was my path to God. That if
mm,
I endured all of these difficulties and these um, harrowing things, then I would, in the end, become more refined, and I would
mm,
become distant from the physical world and distant from natural desires of wanting things, and be focused more on the spiritual. And then I would reach my goal of connecting with being close to God. Let's put it like
right,
that. In this
right.
stage of the journey, was to
Sure,
be close to God. And so
sure.
I know it sounds strange, but I actually liked it.
You liked it. You thought this was getting you
Yes,
close.
yes, I really was very, very into it, and I did more really than was, I was always taking on more things.
Mhm.
Um,
And
so
when was there like a one-time event that stopped that broke that made you start
I
thinking and
there
doubting?
was, but I think there was one thing that, you know, it's only in retrospect when you can kind of put
Mm,
the pieces together. So actually, on the journey, I think there was something really amazing, and that was it was right after my ordination, and once you were ordained, so then the college decided whether you would marry or not to marry, and if you married, who you would marry, and
mm,
if not to. And it was decided for me that I wouldn't marry, and this in the church was actually the closest. You could get
mm,
closer to God by not marrying. Marrying was like a distraction of your
mhm,
Christian avoda, of your Christian
Service.
service.
Right.
So so it was, I wasn't even 21 years old. And when we first went into the college, we took what was called a covenant, but it's really like a vow that we'll be obedient to those in authority over us. And then when I was ordained, then I renewed that vow, that covenant, and also that I would stay with the church for the rest of my life and I never
Mm.
would marry. And I thought that that was the highest and most amazing thing that I could do with my life. And
Wow.
you see, God has a lot of kindness, really. And I think that it's really important to um, think about what we really want, because
Right.
that's what God reads in us. It's like
Right.
He gives all of us free choice. He never imposes Himself upon us, but He will read that most deepest desire that we have. And He read for me that deepest desire, but I wasn't aware of His way of bringing me closer to Him at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it was only about 6 months after my ordination that I received a letter from my mom. First of all, we had no money in the college, no holidays, and no personal phone calls. I never had personal phone calls from my parents, but we were allowed letters. So my mother wrote to me and she said that her youngest brother, my Uncle Sam, both of my mum's brothers who survived came to Israel and fought in the 48 war and married Sephardic wives and settled in Israel. So Uncle Sam, he was settled in Kiryat Shmona, and he knew that my grandfather, his father, had sat Shiva for his sister.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was the eldest and he was the youngest. There were 10 children altogether, only 3 survived.
Mm-hmm.
So Uncle Sam was coming to England, and he wasn't so religious, Uncle Sam, but so he wants to meet his sister. And not only
Mm.
does he want to meet her, but he wants to meet her children. So my mom
Sure.
explains that I live in a church. So my
Mm.
uncle said, listen, can you write to her? And he said, just ask her if she'll give me a little bit of time. I would like to meet her. She can meet her uncle from Israel, and I can meet my niece. And he said, I'm not going to go in the church, but maybe
Mm.
we could just sit in the gardens and we could have a little chat. So I was really excited because I didn't think I would ever have the opportunity to meet any of my mom's family living in Israel. So um, anyway, my uncle arrived, and we were sitting in the garden, and he looked at me, and we didn't wear contemporary dress in the college. So actually, I looked kind of like a cross between the Amish and a Catholic
Mm.
nun, a little bit. Like it was like weird clothes, definitely. And so he looked at me and he said, Tony, what are you doing here? What are you
Mm.
doing behind these high walls and wearing such dark clothes? And he said, don't you know that God gave life to be
Mm.
enjoyed? And he said, come on, cheer up a little bit, laugh a little bit. He said, you know what? I'll send you a ticket to Israel. Why don't you come? And I told him, Uncle, that's so kind of you, but it's too late. I've given my life to God. But he
Wow.
wasn't going to be put off with any of this nonsense. And he kept telling me, Tony, come. He said, you know what? Even if you, after a few days, you tell me, Uncle, I don't like it. He said, I promise I'll put you back on the plane. I'll send you back. But just please give yourself
Mm.
an opportunity to see what is life beyond this place. And I get, Uncle, thank you, but no, I cannot. It's not for me. Too late for me.
Mm.
Anyway, now my uncle told me, Tony, I have to tell you the truth. He said, life in Israel, especially where I'm living in Kiryat Shmona, it's not so easy. We're surrounded by two Arab countries, Lebanon and Syria, and the bombs come raining down, and we have to take the children from their beds and from their school and run to the shelters. And we lose our water, we lose our electricity, and sometimes we have to stay in the shelters for a week at a time. It's not so easy. It's cramped, it's crowded. So he said, actually, my eldest daughter, he said, that's your cousin Nomi. She's married and she has little children, and she's been living also in Kiryat Shmona. But he said, whilst I'm here in England on holiday, Nomi is moving to a calmer home further south, closer to Haifa, to raise her children in a calmer environment. And he said, you know what I'm looking forward to do? And he said, that's to put a mezuzah on the outside of her home. And he said, this is a Sephardic custom that when a child moves to the new home, the father is the one to put the mezuzah on the outside. And he kept saying, I can't tell you how much pleasure this is going to give me to do this for Nomi. And so I asked him, Uncle, what's a mezuzah? I've never heard
Mm.
of one. I've never seen one. I don't know what he's talking about. So he explains, well, it's a pretty box, and inside is a piece of parchment, and it's part of the Jewish Bible. It's handwritten on it by a scribe. And he told me religious Jews have it on every door of their home, and they kiss it when they go in and out. Okay, right before he left, he kept telling me, you know, Tony, he said, I want you to know something that I wish that I had your faith, to believe in
Mm.
something as strongly as what you believe in. And he said, don't get me wrong, I don't want to believe in what you believe in, but I
Mhm.
wish I could believe in anything with such
Mhm.
conviction. And he said, all
Mhm.
right, I see you're not going to come to Israel. But he said, you know, at least I want to send you something from Israel. So he said, think of anything at all that you would like, and I will do my best to find it and to send it to you. And I think at this point, he was probably thinking, I wanted a piece. Like my mom went to visit Israel and she came back with like thorns that was from Jesus' crown, or, you know, or
Mhm.
a piece of the original cross or wood or some, you know, I think my uncle was probably asking me, but I don't know why. I just said, you know what? I would like a mezuzah. I said, you keep
Wow.
saying that you there's about this little thing and you're going to put it on your daughter's home and you're so excited and it's going to give you great pleasure. And what is it? I want to see. I want to
Mm.
see what is this little thing. I said, you've been away from your home for over 3 weeks. And you're not, when you get to your country, you're not even going to go to your home. You're going to go to your daughter's home and put it on her door. And you're so excited about it. So
Mm.
please, will you send me this?
Mm.
I
Do you
told
think
him,
it was your Jewish neshama, your Jewish
I
soul
guess
asking for that?
I
Yeah.
guess it was. I don't know. Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, it was just very, very random. I don't know what made me to ask for it, but yeah. Anyway, so, and also I think that what was really divine providence and amazing, and I think this was such a very, very powerful connection for me with my Jewish identity, was
Mhm.
that I told you my uncle was not religious. So
Mm.
years later, when I did leave the church and I went to Israel to learn Torah in depth, and I went to my uncle's home and visited. So he had tiny little mezuzahs on his door. Yeah, they were kosher, but they were tinsy. But look at the divine providence. He went out of his way and he purchased a full size kosher mezuzah. And he left the
Wow.
back open so I could see the scroll inside. And he drew a diagram so neatly as to which doorpost and all the instructions of how to put it up and everything perfectly, how to put the mezuzah properly on the door. And so, about 10 days after I'd seen my uncle, this little padded envelope arrived for me in the church. And when I opened it and I saw that it was a mezuzah, I remember sitting on my bed in the church and I took out the little mezuzah scroll because, as I said, it left it open. And I remember thinking, wow, what are you supposed to do with it? Are you supposed to open it? Because it was all wrapped
Mm.
up so carefully. But it seemed to be wrapped carefully, and I figured I'd better not touch it. So I put it back in his little box. But that night, after evening prayers, our day started at 5:30 in the morning and finished at 10:30 at night. And when we were not um, fasting, so we were given a cup of hot cocoa. But instead of going into the dining room for my cocoa, I ran down to the cellars of the church and I managed to find a hammer and some nails. And I ran back
Mm.
up to my room, which I shared with two non Jews. And I took my uncle's letter and I made sure to do everything perfectly. And I banged the mezuzah on my door in the church, and my uncle told me you're supposed to kiss it. He said Jews kiss it. And so I kissed it. And all of a sudden, I got so scared out of my mind because we weren't allowed to do anything without permission. And I figured, wow, I got so excited about this little thing. I forgot to ask permission first. And I remember thinking, but what could be wrong with it? It's only a piece of wood and it's only a piece of parchment. And all I did was I didn't ask. So I figured I'll take it down quickly and I'll run find the principal. And for sure he will say yes. So I was extremely naive. So when I find him and I bounced up to him and I was so excited and I said, look, my uncle, he sent me a mezuzah and it's from Israel and it's so pretty. And can I please put it up? And he didn't say anything. He just put his arm out at hand out at arm's length. And I pop it in and then he started to screw his nose up and he said, just look at it, child. I said, well, I'm looking at it. What's wrong with it? And he said, what's wrong with it? Tell me, what's nice about it? He said, well, actually, what's nice about it is that my uncle sent it to me from Israel. And could I please put it up? And he said, no, the Jews have this for superstitious reasons. And we don't believe in that kind of rubbish. He said, no, you cannot put it up. But Hannah gave it to me back. And you know, the only little tiny place in the entire universe that I had at that time in my life that was just mine was a tinsy-wincy little bedside cabinet with a tiny little drawer. And I put the mezuzah in the drawer. And I'll tell you the truth, I forgot about it. But let's look for 1 second. What happened here? Look what happened here. Where was I? I was in the lowest, darkest, most despicable place that God forbid a Jewish soul should ever be, in a church. But it was innocent. I was born there. I had no idea there was such a thing as a Jewish soul, and I had one. I had no idea of any of this stuff. But look what came by divine providence was this little kosher mezuzah with its eternal message that there's only one God. And I put it in that little drawer, and each night, and I lay down to go to sleep, it was right next to my head. But we know that the mezuzah watches us in our comings and our goings, not just when we're in our place of dwelling, but wherever we are. And from that moment that God sent me that little mezuzah, it watched me. And I think it was slowly after that as I started to question, not in a bad way, but just search deeper and and I think it was another almost 4 years later, and I grew tremendously in the church, and I had a lot of responsibility, and I was on the roster to preach the main sermon. And I remember this moment like it was 1 second ago, and I took my Bible and my study books down from the shelf to prepare my sermon. And I'd been in the college for 8.5 years, and I felt like that I'd grasped everything there was to grasp of the Christian God. And I can tell you, Hannah, that from my journey, I've learned that there's a vast difference between spirituality and godliness. And
What do you mean by that?
well, I think God in his divine wisdom there is a low level of spirituality in the world, and non-Jews can tune into it. There's many Buddhist monks in the mountains of the Himalayas. They choose a life of a minimalistic life. They'll probably eat 1 tiny bowl of rice in a day with no salt and live off herbs. And I can promise, if you ask any single one of them, why do they do it? Why do they choose a life like this, to be secluded and isolated? And I promise they will tell you that it makes them feel good. They live this life of spiritual seclusion. And but the truth is, for a Jew, a Jew will never feel fulfilled unless he connects with God. And the only way for a Jew to do that is through the connection with learning of the Torah and the performance of the commandments. And but this was totally foreign to me at this moment. I don't know anything. All I know is that there's when I have a spiritual experience in the church, I did have spiritual experiences, but I felt like it led me into an absolute vacuum, so hollow. And I remember so many times asking the principal, when you have a spiritual experience, where do you go from there? What I was really asking was, how do I connect with God within the spiritual experience? Like, that's just a journey. Where's my destination? But he didn't understand what I was asking, because for him, for a non-Jew, that's the ultimate, and that's the place of ultimate fulfillment for them, that height of that spiritual experience. But like I keep saying, I had no idea of this Jewish neshama and this whole other connection that I was searching and needed. And so this particular day, I remember saying with my Christian Bibles and books in my hand, saying to the Christian God, I understand everything that there is to understand about you, but what else? I need something more. And then it was a whole process, because I tell myself, wait a minute, I'm just me. How could it be possible? It's like a ridiculous thing to say to God, because I'm taught that the Christian God is God. And so how could I say to God, I understand everything there is about you? And so then it made me wonder, who is my God, that I could understand him? And then I wondered, for the first time in my life, is there really a God? Or have I just been brainwashed all of my life? And then I wondered, am I so indoctrinated about hellfire and eternal damnation that I'm petrified not to believe all of this stuff? But maybe it's not true at all. And I think one of the other things that was really like part of all of this was, I just felt like God should exist whether I believed in him or not. I felt like within the church, like God was as big as I could make him with my own belief and my own experience of fasting for a week at a time and having a spiritual high. And then I'm kind of making a spiritual experience. But God should exist outside of me. He should just exist. And it shouldn't have anything to do with me. And I'm still very stubborn about it. Like I drove my rabbis crazy when I was here in Israel and in a Chabad seminary, because it's like, wait a minute, I'm never, ever, and until today, over 40 years later, going to believe in anything ever again. And this has to be true, and it's going to work, or outside of myself and my own belief, or you wouldn't even know my name.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about the transition. I mean, you're
Oh,
now
wait, yeah,
living.
yeah.
Yes,
So
go
there
ahead.
was one more thing, and that was,
Sure.
so that's why I think it was like the neshama, the Jewish soul, because like after I said maybe there's not a God and maybe I'm just brainwashed, and I remember I was quiet to myself, just standing in myself with my thoughts for a second, and then I said, there has to be a God, and if there is a God, it's a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's a God I have to find. And
Why did you think that?
I
Why do you
don't
think it
know.
was the
The
I don't
only
know.
thing I can think, it was just my soul. I've had the mezuzah now over 4 years. It's just sitting there in my drawer. I totally forgot about it. I don't remember ever once taking it out. But I gradually came to this place, but from that moment on, no one knew. But there on my knees every day in that church, I prayed only to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If only you could hear me now. Please hear me and help me to find you. Lead me to the path of truth. I thought I'd gone
Incredible.
mad. Honestly, I said to myself, have you gone mad? But I was already an awakening, I think, of my soul. And it was like a pushing. That's the only way. It was like this pressure from deep inside of myself, like, so, go, and it was this searching. And yes,
That's incredible.
yeah. So
I, I
yeah,
mean,
so
you're now living in Sfas. You're
yeah,
a you're working in a Chabad seminary,
yeah.
yeah, and your path has been, I mean, tremendous. You're a religious woman, a Torah observant woman. How do you look at your religion today? How do you look at your relationship with God today?
Well, I hope it's not offensive to anyone, Hannah. My husband said I shouldn't say it because people don't understand what I mean, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that is I passionately hate religion. It's like
Mm,
I smell it a mile off and I will run in the opposite direction. So then, yeah, how do I connect with all of this now? It's I connected with God. And it's like my
mm,
passion from when I was a little girl was to connect with God. And this to me is all just God. And this is the relationship that I yearned when I was a little girl, that I found it now. And it's not been an easy journey. There's been many, many challenges of how that God has his interesting ways of helping us to undo the past and reconnect with him in a Jewish way, and cleanse us really of, it's when I was in the learning in the Chabad seminary, all of the girls I was learning what would tell me, Tova, you're going to marry a rabbi and you're going to go on shlichus, you're going to be out there and everything. And I said, no, I'm not. And they were all shocked about it. And I said, no, because Hannah, I knew I wasn't looking to put on different clothes. I needed to change every single cell in my body. Really,
mm,
when I arrived in Judaism, and I was a goy, I was like a non-Jew, but I had a Jewish soul. And I
mm,
needed to change every single cell in my body and my thought process, my emotion. I had to undo everything and then come back. And it was very deep process. And I really believe anyone can change, but um, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes persistence, and it takes consistency. But if you really want to change, any of us can change slowly, slowly,
mm,
step by step. And I'm really excited to tell you that I am today a complete Jew, body, soul, and mind. And it's very, very exciting. And a lot of times people say, Tova, how do you keep your faith so strong? And it's just gratefulness. I can't believe it myself. I really can't believe that I was there in
mm,
so far. And you're a person, you're a lucky person that you were raised with the cream of Judaism, with deep Kabbalistic thinking and teachings, and it's integrated into you with kosher and Shabbat and the Jewish holidays. It's just the fiber of who you are. And you can never ever understand the pain of a Jewish soul in so far and in such isolation, and I will never forget it.
mm. Wow, wow, that's incredible.
And
I'm wondering if you have any connection with your family till today. Like, what was their reaction when you became this religious Hasidic Jew?
yeah, um, well, that's a really good question. I think that, first of all, I think my mother was absolutely petrified. I think that she was so scared that my father would accuse her. Like,
Mm,
how did that happen? Like,
mm,
actually, my uncle, before he passed away, he made a complete tshuva, because when he saw me, and I didn't tell him, I wanted to make a surprise. So when he actually saw me, and I was in a Chabad seminary in Sfat learning Torah, and he just burst into, he couldn't believe it. And then when he saw me doing the prayers after eating bread, like the benching and stuff, he just, every single second, he just kept bursting into tears. He said, "What? You're saying the prayers in Hebrew?" And he said, he said to me, "Tova, for you, you're experiencing it, but for us, we're observing it. And for us, it's a
Mm.
greater thing." And he said, if there was a tiny spark and it was rekindled, I could understand it. He said, but there was nothing
Nothing.
there,
Mm.
nothing. And he said, and he kept, how did that happen? And unfortunately, before my first child was born, he always said, if it's a boy, I'm going to be the Sandak. And I would have loved him. But 6 weeks before my son was born, he passed away. But he
Passed
did a
away.
complete tshuva before he passed away. And yeah, he definitely, I'm happy that he got to see this
Right.
transition in its way. And I'm very,
And
very
what
grateful.
about your
Yeah,
parents?
so my father, if honestly, if you had asked me what is the hardest in all of this, I would say that I had to hurt my father so deeply because,
Mm.
like I said, I was the baby. And so I
Mm.
don't know how my father found time to do, he really taught me so many valuable lessons, and that I hold on today. I mean, my
Mm.
father ran the church, but he held a full-time position, a managerial position in an engineering company, and he supported people in the church. He never took money from anyone. He took me
Mm.
to the church every Saturday afternoon to clean the church and put fresh flowers, and he said, this is our duty and our privilege to make it nice for people to come.
Mm.
And he just gave everything. And I was his little shadow. When he went to the hospital and visited the sick every week, I couldn't go in because he had his, his preaching stuff is like dog collar and like everything. But I sat with the matron in the reception area. But I just was happy. I sat and waited. When he went to
Mm.
visit people in their homes, I waited in the car for hours. I just was his little shadow. And
Mm.
so I know it was so painful to him but he
Mhm.
never gave up the desire that I would return. But if you want
Mm.
to hear something really freaky, you know, over the years, like I wrote a book, and then people would invite me to speak and
Right.
everything. And
Let's
no,
tell
but
people about the book that
yeah,
you read.
but people would say, "Wow, you're so amazing" and everything, but it meant nothing to me. And I would come home and I would tell my husband, "You know what? It doesn't matter how many times people say you're amazing. It's like if your own father or your parents not happy
Mm.
with what you're doing, it doesn't matter how
It's
old
very
you are.
hard.
It doesn't mean it's just nothing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like in that way it was very isolating and a little bit lonely because I
I'm
raised my
sure.
children with no one, but Baruch Hashem, there were amazing families, and I'm very, very grateful for, like, the Mr. and Mrs. Rubashkin always invited us to our home and to their simchas.
Mm.
Otherwise, how would my children have ever experienced what a bar mitzvah was, or like option or weddings or anything? They just treated us like family, and I'm very, very
Incredible.
grateful that they were so kind to do that. And also the Weinbaum family that took me in when I ran away from the church with nothing but the clothes I stood in. I thought I would sleep on the street, literally, and it's all in the book. It's like, but
And Tova
it's a
Mordechai's book
miracle
is,
called To Play
I
with
just
Fire.
wanted
Yeah, here it is. You can get it on
to play with
Amazon.
fire, Amazon or
Yeah,
Publishers, to
even
play with
RM
fire,
publishers, yes. Um,
where
and
it tells you the whole story of how you ran away and what, I mean, it's a
yeah,
long
yeah,
story.
it's a long story,
Incredible.
but it's actually everyone's story because I don't really, I honestly, I'm not just saying it because I want to be humble or to try to be like something. It really was nothing to do. It's just the Jewish soul. It's like
Mm.
once the soul starts its awakening, and it wants to connect, then it's a journey. It's like it just wakes up, and
Mhm.
it's just, you don't really understand it when you're muddling through all the things. It's only in retrospect that you can look back and see the actual hand of God in every little tiny step of the journey, and then how it all comes together. But I would definitely like to say I'm so grateful to the Weinbaum family, to Dr. Weinbaum and Sandy Weinbaum, because I don't think anyone on earth would have taken me in, Hannah.
Mhm.
You can't understand what a wreck of a human being I was, emotionally, physically. And they had 7 children at the time. Their eldest was only 8. And they
Mhm.
took me for 3 days, and I ended up staying there for 9 months. And it
Wow.
was almost like they had, and now they have 14 children, and there's never a Shabbos goes that they don't send me a message, good Shabbos. There's never a Yom Tov that goes by that when Dr. Weinbaum doesn't call me and bless me. And
Incredible.
they have, can I know her, like hundreds of grandchildren. They never forget me, and
Incredible.
the children just very, very special.
Wow.
Very
Wow.
grateful. Yeah.
Wow.
You know,
Tova,
yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. This was an incredible story. I think we're going to have you back because you just have so much to say and to share. But this was truly incredible, and I just want to wish you continued success in everything that you do, and continued and even closer connection to God. That you should feel it in your life so
I do.
palpably.
I really do. And if I, just in case we don't come back, because if I could just have 1 second, I really just want to share
Sure,
a very, very special story of my mom. When
of
my
course.
mom, like I told you, my mom was baptized. She was married to my father and was a preacher's wife for 60 years. Okay.
Mhm.
Both my parents passed away now. But so when I was 2 years in the college, my mom was found to have cancer. She wasn't one that went to a doctor very easily. So it was very progressed, and she had emergency surgery. 8 doctors ended up working on her, and she had 2 massive heart attacks during the surgery. And the next
Mhm.
morning, the doctors told my father, it's a miracle. In their own words, they said, we have no explanation as to why your wife is alive today. We have no explanation. So anyway, the only thing, my mom asked to be called of a Jewish name of Sarah. And from that
Mhm.
time, she was 42 years old, but until she passed away at like 85, my mom was known in the church as Sister Sarah. Okay.
Mhm.
Then I um, I got married during the time, and I did not tell. I know this sounds bad, maybe a little austere, but I just felt it was better if I didn't tell my parents I was getting married, because I knew that my father was very heartbroken anyway. And first, I'd taken a vow that I would never marry, and not only had I come to Orthodox Judaism, but now I'm going to marry, and
Mhm.
everything was just like too much, too much. So I just said to my husband, we'll just get married, and somewhere
Mhm.
along the line, we'll break the news. So I was 6 months pregnant with our first child, and he said, you've got to break the news. So to cut a long story short, I wrote a postcard home, and I said, dear Daddy and Mommy, a wonderful time in Israel. Weather is marvelous. P.S. By the way, I got married. Little postcard, send it off. I got a telephone call from one of my sisters, and she said, I'm just warning you, Daddy and Mommy have booked tickets to Israel, and Daddy is livid. He
Oh boy.
cannot believe that you dare to do such a thing, and he's so disgusted with this so called husband of yours. He didn't even ask for your hand in marriage. Anyway, Daddy and Mommy are coming to Israel to see who this person is that you have married, and don't tell me that I didn't warn you. Okay, Margaret, no problem. Thank you very much. Okay, a bit later, I get a telephone call from my father that he and my mom, they're going to stay with Uncle Sam in Kiryat Shmona. They will make it their business to come to Sofet for one day to visit me and my husband.
Mhm.
Okay, no problem. We were living in Kiryat Chabad. Okay, so they come, and I have this baggy dress because I like to hide the little bump. It was like a hippie like dress,
Right.
and but thank God my husband was sitting with my dad in our little living room, and I went into the kitchen to make food, and my mom tiptoed in, and she whispered, and she said, Tova, do you know what prayer I said when I was on the operating table? This has Hannah over 12 years since my mother's surgery. She'd never had a relapse. And honestly, I'd totally forgotten that my mom had ever been sick. And I looked at her. She's married to my father at this time for over 40 years, the preacher's wife. She sits in church almost every night of the week, never said one word ever of anything Jewish. And I looked at her and I said, Mommy, I don't know. I don't know what prayer you said. You could have said one of many. And my mother whispered, I said Shema.
Oh, wow. Wow. Chills. Wow. Incredible.
I always think it's so amazing, you know. She was the same age. My grandmother died, the same cancer, and the same age. And when she was lying there on that operating table, no one knew. But she knew two things: who was her God and who she was. Who she
Incredible.
really
Wow.
was. Yeah. And just to finish about my dad, I told you I was going to, I always wondered, what did God do with my father? Because God is just. And God, my father did unbelievable kindness to so many people. And he had to somehow get some kind of reward for that. And about 3 weeks after my father passed away, he came to me in a dream. I didn't see him, but I heard his voice so clearly. And he was shouting at me like when I was a little girl. My father never hit me, but he would, you know, try to, it was military, so there was no nonsense, you know.
Right.
And so he said, but in my dream, he said to me, that's it. He said, after everything you put me through, that's the best Jew that you could be. He said, get it together, girl.
Mm.
So I promised.
Wow.
And it was an endorsement. That's why I was telling
Right.
you that was so special that the Abishter allowed my dad to come back and give me that endorsement. And not only that, but he pulled me up. And I'm a better Jew since my dad came and yelled at me.
Amazing. Wow.
That's
Wow.
it.
Really incredible. Thank you so much, Tova, for joining us for your incredible
Yes, thank
story.
you. Thank you so
And we
much.
just wish you continued blessing in your life. Only
Amen.
continued blessing.
Amen.
Thank
For
you.
all
Thank
of
you for
us.
thank you. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Yes, God bless.
Wow, that was a fascinating story. Just incredulous the way Tova just describes her journey, what she's been through, the different things that awakened her. Really, really, I found that just incredible, just sitting on the edge of my seat the entire time, just listening to her beautiful way of articulating herself. What stands out from her stories, there's so many different points, but what stood out was really that Mezuzah story, how the Mezuzah was something that kept her, how one mitzvah could so much awaken. She was confined in this place of such spiritual impurity for her, and yet that one connection to a mitzvah really pulled her and helped her discover who she was, her Jewish soul. And it resonated later on in the story, the same similar thing, that how her mother, with that saying the prayer of Shema, and how she's been saying that prayer of Shema, that was really an incredible story as well. That just shows the power of one mitzvah, how one mitzvah could reawaken us, reawaken our connection, and really change the results for us. What I also really loved was how Tova said that her story is not just her story, but it's all of our story. And that part resonated with me a lot. How we might not be in some place, in some Christian ministry, or in some training school where we're doing something like she was doing, but we all have that journey, the journey of the Jewish soul, and how we can all awaken. And the awakening comes through that connection, through the Torah, through the mitzvot, as she explains so beautifully, how each and every one of us can try to do that one thing, and how that one aspect, that one mitzvah, that one good deed could truly reconnect us in such profound ways and help us to escape our own spiritual prisons, whatever they might be, and whatever form they take, even if it's not as severe as the ones that she escaped from. If you enjoy watching these interviews, and after this one, I would love to hear your reaction, your questions, what you thought of. In fact, Tova told me afterwards that she'd love to get questions from you and perhaps do a follow-up. What kind of questions might you have for Tova? What kind of thoughts might you have? What were you inspired by in her interview? I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary to receive these podcasts in your inbox. I hope that you are checking us out as well on Spotify and Apple Music. We are there. We are also on YouTube. You can check us out in all these places to watch us while you're on the go or while you're doing something. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for your comments. And thank you so much for being part of this extraordinary community.